Hello everyone, it's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. In this video, I wanted to talk about China's dominance of the battery production in the world. Um, it's actually fairly striking how dominant China is in terms of battery manufacture, and the newly passed Inflation Reduction Act in the United States with the subsidies for electric vehicles in the US with batteries that are sourced from our free market, free trade partners or ourselves is basically a way of trying to challenge this dominance. So just to see how dominant China is, basically China produces about 77% of the world's lithium ion batteries. It controls 80% of the raw material refining and 60% of the component manufacturing. So one country controls 80% of the raw material, 77% of total capacity, and 60% of the components. And in a world where uh, EVs are going to become likely the dominant transportation, that can be a major problem. So here's the current state of affairs in 2022. The largest battery manufacturer in the world is CATL. And CATL alone accounts for more than a third of the entire world's battery production. And next is LG Chem, which is a South Korean company. This is the company that is partnered with GM and is going to produce their Ultium batteries. Next is BYD, and they make batteries, but they're also a car company backed by Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett invested in them early, like over a decade ago. They're actually the third largest auto manufacturer in the world as well. And then next is Panasonic. Panasonic, remember, was the first partner for Tesla when Tesla, um, early on when Tesla was making Model S's, Panasonic was their cell manufacturer. And so you can see in the red is Chinese companies, and then blue is South Korean companies, and this is the single Japanese company. Before, about 10, 12 years ago, the dominant battery manufacturers in the world were Japanese and then followed by Korean. Uh, lithium-ion battery producers, and Chinese battery manufacturing was essentially non-existent. So what happened here? What happened was is that about 10 years ago, or around 2010, 2009, China realized that the US and Europe dominated the internal combustion engines for decades, and they probably wouldn't be able to catch up. But they realized that there was a shift in transportation, and that the world was most likely going to shift into EVs. So they decided that on the EV front, they were all starting in the same place, and if they invested a lot of money into EVs, they could become the dominant player in EVs. So the Chinese government provided more than $100 billion in subsidies to promote this industry, and included in that was a lot of money for research and things like that. So over the past 10 years, they took care of most of the supply chain. So if you look here, um, China controls most of the lithium mined in these countries, in Australia and Chile, and also China is ramping up their own lithium production on the domestic side. And as we know, cobalt is a really important mineral currently in lithium-ion batteries, and the Congo produces about 60% of the world's lithium, excuse me, of cobalt. And 15 of the country's 19 cobalt mines are owned or financed by Chinese companies and backed by billions from state-run banks. So uh, that that is how China controls the lithium battery production from top to bottom. And so currently, what the United States is trying to do is what China did over 10 years ago. China basically put in a bunch of subsidies to increase demand for batteries and subsidize manufacturing of batteries and supply chain issues. And that's paying dividends for them now. And America is trying to play catch up by doing the exact same thing. China at that time also gave subsidies for EVs in their for Chinese cars only if the batteries were made by Chinese companies in China. So that's what America is doing right now. All right. So the success of China's battery strategy can most easily be told through the story of CATL. So this is Robin Zhang. He is the CEO and founder of CATL. He is currently the third richest guy in China and the 29th richest man in the world, and worth $30 billion. He's lost about $500 million in the last year because it's been a rough year for everyone in the last year. Markets haven't been good, but he's still worth 30 billion, so you don't have to feel too sorry for him. Anyways, the story is that he met with this guy, Herbert Dice. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his last name right. Back in 2010, they met together. At that time, Robin Zhang was working for a small company called Amperex Technology, which he founded, and he he also was working with TDK. TDK is a manufacturer in Japan that was making lithium-ion batteries for laptops. Herbert Zeiss was the supply chain head of supply chain for BMW at the time, and they were starting to move into EVs. And he was looking for an EV battery supplier, and he talked to Robin Zhang and asked if he could build him batteries for cars. At that time, Robin Zhang told him that that it would be impossible, that it'd be impossible to build such big batteries. But then a year later, Zhang led a group of Chinese investors and acquired an 85% stake in TDK's EV battery business, and they named that company CATL. So CATL was a company that was made only 11 years ago in 2011. The entire company is only 11 years old. And since that time, riding the wave of all these subsidies that the Chinese government gave, he grew the company extremely quickly and now is the largest EV battery manufacturer in the world. And this guy sounds like a fairly impressive guy in that back in the early 2000s when he bought a patent for U.S. patent for mobile phone batteries, he worked to improve the battery himself. And also when they finally signed that agreement with BMW to provide cells, he read the 800 pages of requirements line by line himself to make sure that they would meet those requirements. And so starting with that, CATL became the largest battery manufacturer in the world, and they have their own lithium mines in southern China. They have their own source of cobalt in the Congo, and they've grown from a brand new company, a startup, in 2011 to become the most dominant battery manufacturer in the world. And if you remember from my video a few weeks ago, they're moving into sodium ion batteries at this point. So they're a quite innovative company as well. And it was interesting to see how China invested so much money into this sector 10 years ago. And America currently only produces 8% of the world's batteries, and China produces 76%. So in order for that to change, America needs to invest a lot of money into manufacture and supply chain integration for batteries. And that is one of the big thrusts of the new legislation. So now we understand kind of the reasoning behind having the subsidies tied to sourcing in the US. I think the United States and Europe are both concerned about having so much supply chain tied up in China because, especially after the war in Ukraine, they are concerned that having s- supply chains for critical manufacturing sectors tied to an authoritarian regime could have supply chains cut off instantaneously. So they want to build up their own supply chains that are more robust and less resistant to political issues. So that's why they are trying to force manufacturers to bring back the supply chain for batteries and raw materials back to either domestic sources or with sources with countries they have a really good relationship with. Because unfortunately, relations between China and the US have soured quite a bit in the past couple of years. Okay, well, I thought that was a very fascinating story. I did not realize until I was looking into this that CATL was only slightly over a decade old, and they grew from basically nothing to become this. And they currently have a manufacturing capacity of about 300 gigawatt hours, and they plan on tripling their capacity um, by 2030. And so it doesn't look like, even with large changes, that America is going to catch up anytime soon. Maybe over the next 10 years, there will be some significant changes in how this map looks. All right. Well, thanks for watching. Hopefully that was interesting. Um, Thanks to all of our viewers and to our supporting members. And have a great day, everyone.